Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and today I'm thrilled to be joined by Alex Hassell to talk all about his current TV series, Rivals. And
Hi.
I feel like in the first episode, there's such a great introduction to who this character is. Within the first couple of
Yeah,
scenes, we see him,
yeah,
hooking up in the bathroom, walking down the aisle like he's a rock star. We see him
yeah.
tennis court with another lady, and we know exactly who this person is on the surface. And so when you read the scripts, how did that just give you a really vivid idea and concept of how you might approach playing him and developing him?
Yeah, what a great question. I mean, first of all, it was a question of being aware from the sort of source material and in the cultural sort of ether, the idea of what Rupert is thought of as being, and therefore the qualities he should have kind of for free. And the fact that the audience had to perceive him in a certain way and receive certain things from him just kind of all the time, in terms of a sort of charisma or that kind of thing, which was quite intimidating, to be honest. The writing is completely brilliant, so that really, really helps. And obviously the hair and makeup department, all of those sorts of things. But to try and swagger, in the way that he does, reading it off the page, it's often unhelpful in scripts because they write what the audience is supposed to think rather than what you're supposed to do, which therefore can be quite intimidating. But I like that you say he appears to you, it feels like you seem to know him in the first two scenes, because actually what I love so much about Rupert and what was in the script is that he actually is quite enigmatic and is so much more layered than he immediately appears to be. I think, as you say, in the first two scenes, I think the third shot of the entire show is my bum and like we're having sex in Concord, and then the next scene, as you say, is naked tennis, and he's obviously a Lothario and a player and very, very confident and swaggering and sexual and um, sort of witty. But it was brilliant to delve into the scripts and find all of the other stuff that is potentially his private face more than his public face.
Right, because in terms of his private face, he actually seems like quite a lonely, isolated person, but in social
Yeah.
settings, he's very adept at going up to anybody and kind of like moving in social circles with ease. And was
Yes.
that something that you kind of really drew from a lot early on? Because we see him in his house and it's really just him and his dogs, and he's divorced and
Yeah.
doesn't see his kids.
That's right. Well, there's a sort of gothic prince element of him sort of rolling around in this massive house. I mean, Gilly is thought of by some as kind of the Jane Austen of the 80s. And there is a Darcy-esque quality, or obviously not Austen, but a Rochester-esque quality of those sorts of period heroes where they are isolated and lonely and problematic and often rude, abruptly rude, and not nice to the person that they end up falling in love with and having this sort of relationship with. And this story sort of fits into that, but in a very different 80s world. Um, so definitely there's a loneliness to him, and he's lived a very particular life of extreme privilege, and he's an Olympian, an ex-Olympian. So winning and competition and kind of alpha male dominance is an extremely important part of his identity and how he sort of cuts through a group of people and a space. But then those things ultimately haven't led to him being happy on any deeper level. So when he is by himself, he is confronted, I think, although he's not a very reflective person, I don't think, he's confronted by loneliness and isolation and sort of having burnt all of his bridges and trying to work out how to have maybe more enriching relationships.
Yeah, because there's a point where someone's asked him in the show, have you do you think you've ever actually been in love? And he admits that he hasn't. And did you
Yeah.
think that, maybe probably even since childhood and even before we meet him in the show, that that's something that he's just always struggled with in building deep connections a bit?
Yeah, that's right. There was a bit in the script actually that I think didn't make the cut, but in that interview scene where he says that he's never been in love, and in fact he says he likes dogs much more than people. That his it talks a little bit about his parents and his upbringing, and I suppose potentially like lots of people in in that kind of upper echelons of English society in those days were fairly estranged from their parents actually, and brought up by nannies, and had a very a kind of fairly militant upbringing, I think I can't remember which one. Either his dad or his mum was married multiple times and left, and so I think he hasn't had a great, good role models for loving relationships. And then at an early age was extremely famous and considered this catch, and also this kind of, I mean, which is fairly hilarious considering he's now a Tory politician, but a kind of rock star-esque charisma and sex appeal. So he would have had women throwing, in his mind anyway, throwing themselves at him for his whole life. So his idea of relationships isn't built on amazingly solid ground.
And you were bringing up that obviously he's an ex-Olympian that now is in politics and potentially the world of television as his next
Yeah,
next step. But it's quite an interesting point to meet a character like him because he does have that charm and that charisma, but he's reaching a point in his life where it's not working quite as well as it used to, and there are more repercussions for his behavior, it feels
yeah,
like, than he's possibly
definitely.
experienced. And so how did you want him to respond to that? Because like you said, he's not necessarily reflective, but he is responsive to the way that people, see him and view him.
Yeah. I think over the course of the series, he is definitely confronting that some of his old sort of modes of operating aren't working. So he was obviously a sports person and would take these huge risks and gambles to try and win. And ultimately, like for example, he won the gold medal, the Olympic gold medal with one arm. I think he dislocated his shoulder and decided, I'm going to do it and I'm going to manage, and it won, but he would take huge gambles in that way, and he's sort of addicted to that high rolling life, I think, but is now doing it with in a non-sports arena with political maneuvering, so actual people's actual lives and welfare, or in fact other people's money or his own money, because he just needs to win and is sort of addicted to this high stakes, um, getting ahead of other people in very high stakes environments. So he needs to kind of keep being at the top of the pile, whatever that new pile is. And it pushes him to further and further extremes, which is, I think, as it goes, he realizes it's not a healthy way to be. And if he actually wants to have real friendships and real relationships, he keeps kind of killing those by doing these things.
It's such a great point that you mentioned though, that addiction to really high stakes situations. And I was actually curious if you feel like because of that, he maybe potentially subconsciously instigates drama around himself because it's like he needs to have some sort of specific energy that he's experiencing.
Yes, I also think he's just a deeply mischievous, quite rebellious person, and I think he likes to stir it up and likes to create chaos. I think there's a narcissism on some level, I mean, on many quite large levels, that he needs to be the center of attention and needs to be being talked about no matter sort of what it is that you're saying. So will just cause trouble. I think he enjoys getting away with it too, I think, for such a long time in his life. And I think Declan says this in the show that somehow he does these often abhorrent things or terrible things or things that most people would be sort of shouted down for, and the nation just love him for it. There's some magic twinkle in his eye or something that means he's a lovable rogue, in quotation marks, for stuff that's really questionable. So I think he's like, well, let me see if I can get away with this. Like, I might as well keep, doing what sort of impishly comes into my mind, but because why not? I think he sort of has enjoyed that sort of place in his life for a long time, and that was fun to play because I would often feel like that it's like in his head he has an audience, and that I sort of would find myself doing like responses to things that I hope wouldn't appear too big on camera, because he feels like he's being watched and is sort of amused, looking at himself, being amused that he got away with that or something. And like he sort of can't help but show it and sort of show off to no one. He's a huge show off, I think is a big part of it too.
I also love that point that you were saying, as long as he's being talked about, that's kind of
Yeah.
important because there's a scene in one of the early episodes where the husband of someone that he has slept with punches him in the face very publicly in front of everybody. And rather than being fazed by it, he strong arms the guy and kind of shows him off.
Yeah.
He kind of
Yeah.
takes the glory in that situation, even though he's the villain. And so, did you have a sense of how he was going to respond to something like that, where it's like, how
Yeah,
can I twist it back to my ego?
it was really interesting in those scenes to try and think like that kind of person. I am very, very different to Rupert. I would not do most of the things that Rupert does. And I certainly haven't come from the level of privilege and money and all of those sorts of things. So to try and get my head around, I would be extremely apologetic in lots of the sort of environments that he's in. But he just finds it funny. I think he sort of finds it hilarious that he's caused drama and that he's had sex with someone else's wife and everyone now knows about it is somehow hilarious to him. It's sort of yeah, there's a Lord of Misrule quality about him that he's just a naughty schoolboy still, that hasn't been told off enough and hasn't been given boundaries. Um, so he keeps sort of pushing at the boundaries to see when someone is going to sort of rein him in. And I think on some level that's what Taggy does. Although she's not necessarily stern about it, she pulls him up about stuff very frequently and about his behavior. And I think he sees something in her that he wants to, although he wouldn't want to admit it, he wants to sort of better himself and be the best part of himself that he can be to be acceptable in her eyes. Somehow he wants to, she seems to think that he's capable of much more goodness than he thinks he's capable of. And he wants to see if he can live up to that aspect that she believes in, which I think is a wonderful idea.
And you do see him trying to do certain things to kind of meet her more at her level rather than, expecting her to meet him in his corner. But he doesn't necessarily have the tools to know how to do it. So it's quite entertaining
No.
to watch that.
Yeah.
What was that like in terms of exploring someone that has this desire to be a better version of themselves, but just goes about it in all the wrong ways?
Well, he's got such wit, which is the script, obviously, and what we always wanted to do, and that they've done so brilliantly, is to keep multiple plates spinning at the same time. So he can be being very genuine, and then to someone that he's supposedly having strong feelings for, and but then another woman will walk past and he'll just look at, or that he'll be boasting about having sex with one person in front of someone else that he's obviously romantically linked with. Um, and sees no sort of doesn't see that that is a weird disconnect. Was hard to get my head around, but it's definitely fun to play. And the more that we've managed to keep all of those plates spinning, we really don't want this to be a journey of him learning, and that's it. Like it needs to be backwards and forwards, constantly, because you don't learn like that and you don't change like that. And I think he thinks it's fun and he questions whether he should change and why can't people just want him the way he is. Um, So it was really fun trying to add levels of mischief all the time. Yeah.
There's a moment where he kind of partakes in what seems like a selfless act because someone else has been photographed by a photographer, and he's like, if you destroy those photos, I'll act like I'm really drunk and let you take
Yeah.
pictures of me, and you can sell papers off the back of that because I'm also more well known. And did you think that that was something that was genuinely a really selfless thing, or did you think that also a little bit of it was, then my picture's going to be splashed all over the papers as well?
Oh, that's a great question. No, in that instance, I totally think it's selfless. I think he's probably over. While he definitely does have a huge narcissism and everything and wants to be talked about. I think on some level he just understands the currency, his currency. I think he doesn't. It's not like he wants to be on the front of the papers all the time, but doesn't mind and is aware, he is aware that so much is printed about him that is sort of reprehensible and he can get away with it, why not add that to the pile to save someone else? And I think that is very genuine. He does that for genuine reasons to help Taggy, really, but to also help Charles, because actually, deep down, he is and does have goodness in him and a sense of being charitable, um, and real compassion and kindness. It's just underneath all of these alpha layers, I think.
You just have to dig a little bit deeper to find them in him.
Yeah. I think so. And and that I think is partly why it's interesting that his love interest, his overarching love interest, is so much younger than him, which obviously you see very frequently in all sorts of media, and it can be really tiresome. And I find it often really complicated to see every, leading older man has a younger love interest. But in this instance, I think it's totally integral to the whole story that there is this age gap, because it is something of her hopefulness of youth and a degree of, more innocent and more naive and sort of purer on some level that drives him to try and find that in himself in a way that I think is, and he doesn't want to crush that or ruin that or sort of sully that, as he has to so many women, I think. So I think that's why Gilly wrote it like that, as far as I would guess, because it makes him have to try harder.
And the chemistry watching that on screen, between Rupert and Taggy is also quite interesting because it's never to do with anything with touch. It's not a physical relationship, but
Yeah,
throughout the whole
yeah,
season, it's just these looks that they're giving each other, or that kind of like intrinsic chemistry when they're talking to each other in a room. They're the only two people in the room, even if there's 20 other people there. And so,
yeah.
how did you set about really developing that with Bella McLean?
It was extremely easy, actually. We had to chemistry read together before I got the part. She'd been cast already, and I, as my final audition, went in to read with her, and we just instantly got on really, really well. We're very similar in all sorts of ways, and approach the work in similar sorts of ways, and have similar sense of humors, and just immediately understood how to act with each other and how to. With some people, you just get loads for free. There's just a lot happening between you for free. And sometimes that would be really complex because we just giggled all the time. We would just, for some reason, and obviously we would be looking into each other's eyes a lot. That was a lot of, as you say, our part. And there was something about that we would just be triggered to laughter so frequently that it would be quite annoying, I think, for the crew. But we tried to also accept that that meant that there was some sort of fizziness between us, which was really important for the show. So, um, yeah, it was just very natural, to be honest. We tried not to overthink it, I think, and tried to just be responsive to each other and available to each other.
And also with what you were describing with Taggy being someone who can kind of call him on things and that he wants to be a little bit better for, I feel like there's elements of that in the friendship that he has with Lizzy, played by Catherine
Yeah,
Parkinson in the show, because they've known each, they have such a history together and a friendship, and she can tell him, "You've gone too far this time. You've pushed the boundaries too
yeah.
much. Like you need to pull yourself back a bit," in a way that no one else can really speak to him. And what did you find that was so specific in that friendship that she was able to talk to him and have that
Mm.
relationship with him?
That's funny, I didn't. I mean, this is going to make me sound like such an uninvestigative actor, but I didn't think too much about it. Again, it was very easy, Catherine. I mean, the whole cast are so brilliant at their jobs that it made everything so much easier. Both Bella and Catherine are so fantastically easy and responsive to work with. But there's obviously just something in Lizzy that he feels comfortable about and doesn't and they haven't had sex, it seems. That's not been in their past, so there's something that meant that that didn't happen, that he didn't fancy her, or just that maybe that again there was some instinct of the idea that she, maybe he could slightly open up himself a bit more too. There's probably some nanny related thing, isn't there? It's probably that they like remind him of what his nanny or something. But yeah, I really hope if we go and do more that we get to explore that relationship more, because I think it's really lovely to expose that side of him more. And actually later in the season when she's really vulnerable because of um the place that she finds herself in and being torn between her husband and someone else, he is again actually really open and really listens, but also is trying to encourage her to be mischievous and naughty and break some rules. I think he tries to encourage people who are a bit too straight-laced to break some rules. I think that's kind of what he believes in. Um, but I really enjoy the softness that that sort of gives him.
Yeah, it's such a great space to see these different sides of him in that friendship.
Yeah, he actually responds really differently now I think about it with different people. He's actually, despite being very alpha, he is quite, if he cares about who he's talking to, which often I think he doesn't and may well treat them. I think actually he's always very present and sort of impulsive with people. I think that's probably why he's a good lover, you know, that he is sort of very present with people and it's fun. But I think he's really different with Freddie and really different with Declan and really different with Taggy and with Lizzy uh and Baz, that he actually, I hadn't really thought about it before, but he's actually very available to the people he's with on in some way.
Yeah, and you know you mentioned Declan, which is Aidan Turner's character, and I feel like again it's quite interesting to see what's at play between the two of them because you have Declan basically being like, keep your hands away from my daughter, don't go near her, and he even punches him in the face at one point, but then they also develop this really sweet friendship, you know,
Yeah,
off the back of it and before it. And, you know, we see them go from like the very beginning of getting to know each other to that point where it feels like they are beginning to build like a real kinship with each other.
yeah.
And so how did you set about that, what you wanted that arc to look like? Because like you said, he's very different with him to other people as well.
Yeah, well, again, it's very easy to act with Aiden because he's very, very good. We didn't talk. It's funny. It's really interesting to talk about this because I realized there's so much we didn't talk about. Obviously, we all thought a great deal. I had to do a lot of thinking about Rupert, and for me, it was quite a huge character leap, actually, mentally and in terms of seeing one's exterior in a certain way and all of those sorts of things, and how I would approach mentally and emotionally each scene. I'd have to really think about. So I did a ton of work, but we didn't actually talk loads about relationship dynamics, funnily enough. It just, we all just started doing it and they just emerged accidentally, not accidentally, but through the alchemy and the brilliant casting and, you know, everyone thinking about their characters. But it wasn't like we talked about, we should start here and go over here. I don't think I had those conversations with anyone. Although apart from, I guess, Bella on some level, although it's not like we talked tactically about scenes or anything, but we were definitely aware that this had to ultimately be this huge overarching love story that transcends the all, you know, dozen or so of the books. So it was hard not to approach the early scenes, particularly in which he gropes her horribly and is a total I don't know if I'm allowed to swear on this, but not a great guy. Um, to consider how that starts their journey that becomes this whole other thing. But apart from that, we didn't really talk. We didn't really talk that much about relationships. That's really interesting. Yeah, it
No, but
seems
it's
to
so
have
great when
worked.
you
It
work on
seems
a
to have
project
worked.
and it just
Yeah,
works. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, exactly. I think there was sometimes a thing of this seems to be working, so let's not sort of question it too much, I think.
Yeah. Well, it's that thing where everybody's done so much work individually. Like you said, you know, you've thought about your character so in depth that then you're on set just playing off of it and all that work
Yeah.
is just automatically coming into play.
Also, the scripts are so good. I mean, Gilly's initial writing and story, obviously, and then the scripts are so well realized, and the characters are all so witty and so well cast. And I think everyone is cast. Just, I can't imagine anyone playing anyone else playing any of these parts. But also, most people are playing parts that are actually slightly different to lots of parts that they usually play, or you know, are exploring different territory for themselves, which is always so exciting. So there was this sort of just a buzz, like a fizzy buzz all the time between all of us. And we all really loved working together, that you just get so much for free. And I think that's sometimes it's just a great gift and you don't want to question it. You want to get out of the way of it as much as possible. You don't want to sort of get in the way of the flow by over kind of being overly cerebral about it.
Yeah. And in playing him as well, I love some of the body language at play in the scenes that you have with David Tennant. You know, there's a moment where he's in Rupert's office and he's already there before Rupert even knows he is, and he's taken a seat behind his desk with his legs up, you know, just completely
Yeah.
relaxed and spread out and really just alphaing the space in that
Yeah.
situation. Was that something that you thought quite specifically about, or did you find that just through playing him?
No, I thought a lot about, well, it's both, I suppose. I thought a lot about, and then it developed as we're playing it, which is always weird, isn't it? When you do a TV show or a film, you're like, you're going to include the stuff I'm doing the first week? That seems that seems really unfair. I'm still working it out. But yes, I thought a lot physically about him, yeah, in terms of how he interacts with the space, how sort of tactile he is with the space. I sort of realized I was leaning on things a lot, and I was often creating pictures. I thought there was a partly a way that I could convince myself that I could play the part and sort of get across this idea of this, I don't know, romantic hero or something, was in my mind the idea that if at any point someone turned around and took a photo of him, he would look really good as much as possible. So like every way that, I mean, often not, obviously, like when I was really in scenes, but often, you know, the way that I'd be leaning on something or sitting on something, that he's just a cool person. He's much cooler than I am. And therefore I had to think about trying to look cool, which is a weird outside way of thinking, which I haven't often done in terms of characters. I'm just trying to be truthful. But as I say, in this part of the task, definitely felt like Rupert is supposed to come across in a very certain way to audiences, and that's why he's, you know, been this character that people care about. And part of that was that he should look good, and like, so I tried to think about my body in terms of angles and like a model, really. I sort of was freaked out quite early on in the process about it, and was talking to my wife at length about it, who's also an actor. And she was like, they're asking you to be a model at the same time as being an actor. And I was like, oh, okay, no, I can understand that. So I can play the scenes truthfully, but I should be, you know, basically making shapes with my body, and the clothes really help. So I, you know, wear the clothes and think about how I would stand, and which is again not something I do that much because you're trying to be sort of subjective, aren't you, usually when you act? But I had to be much more objective about how I was coming across.
It feels like it ties back to what you were talking about earlier and feeling like there's always an awareness and a thought that there's an audience watching him. And he's
Yeah,
thinking very
yeah,
specifically about
exactly. Yeah,
it.
yeah, and he loves it. You know, he wants people's knees to tremble. Like I think that's, you know, definitely part of, he gets a kick out of people going, "Oh my God, it's him," and part of that is like, I look, you know, he thinks he looks great. I think he like, for example, the tennis court scene. I made the choice, which, you know, I don't know why, in terms of the fact that I had to be naked doing it, but that he would take a really long time before covering himself with a towel because he sort of loves the fact that it's making this young woman really, really awkward. And, you know, likes the idea that people would want to sort of drink him in, which I just think is hilarious. I find him a really funny character to play. And we would cut and I would often just burst out laughing because I couldn't believe that I'd just sort of been as cheeky as I had just been. And try and I would try like consciously to do stuff that I thought they'll never use this. I won't get away with that because I wanted to try and see how far what the boundaries of the character were in terms of how naughty he could be and stuff like that. So I would often do takes very differently and know that they're very unlikely to use these takes. But if one of every sort of 10, if there's one take in every 10 scenes that's like that, then it will push the character a little bit further, you know, out into some wider territory.
I love how much fun it sounds like you
It
had
was
playing
really,
this
really fun.
character.
Yeah, it was really fun. I couldn't believe I was being paid to do quite a lot of what I was doing, to be honest.
Well, I think it shows because it was such a fun season to watch and I loved your performance. So thank you so much,
Thank
Alex.
you
I
very much.
appreciate it.
Thanks so much. Really nice to meet you. Thank you.